Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Dawn Zoldi, one of your hosts.
Hey, and I'm Mike Peel, the other host. We've got some great articles today. We're going to be discussing cUAS over sporting events, sporting stadiums. We're going to be talking about space junk, but that's all the way at the end. And then our favorite topic du jour, we're going to be talking about AI. So we're also going to be talking about risks associated with AI that should be under more consideration. But we're also going to be talking on the fun side with some 3D text to model software that's coming out there. So we got some great guests to talk about this stuff today. We've got Patrick Huston. Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Patrick Huston. I'm a retired Army general. I'm a technology lawyer out in San Francisco, and I focus on AI, cybersecurity, and I'm a board member with the National Association of Corporate Directors.
Thanks, Patrick. And we also got Tim Tenne. So, Tim, what do you do?
Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Tim Tenne. I'm the CEO of Nordic Unmanned North America, subsidiary to Nordic Unmanned Global out of Sandnes, Norway. And I'm a retired Air Force colonel and pilot.
Thanks, Tim. Just want to remind anybody who's watching right now to hit the like button, subscribe, and the notification bell if you're interested in what we're saying. And please do add some questions to the chat. We will try to respond if we have time. So first up, we're going to be talking about Tim's article, which is about cUAS and their deployment around sporting events, or lack thereof. So tell us a little bit about this, Tim.
Great. You're probably wondering why I chose this. For those of football fans that are out there, I think we all know that we have enough timeouts throughout a game that we don't need to slow down games even more for those outcomes. But in the last couple of weeks, we've had 2 to 3 small UAS actually stop NFL games because they couldn't identify the operator, the drone, where it came from, etc. And we also have the counter of the counter UAS industry that has produced a lot of great technology out there that's just waiting, chomping at the bit for government and for the regulators to come up with a policy with regulation and law for us to be able to handle these types of situations without causing another timeout on the field there. And so the reason I chose the article in addition to that was so we could get into a couple things of talking about remote ID and some alternatives with regards to the FAA identifying small UAS, as well as one of the BVLOS Aviation Rulemaking Committee recommendations of pilot experience. If you read that article, you found that most of the time, these aren't nefarious drones that are coming to do bad things, right? So it's usually a recreational remote pilot or an inexperienced pilot that doesn't know that there's an actual zone that they can't fly around because they don't have the experience that's there. And then we have the industry that wants to do things like kinetic operations against a small UAS. Don't forget, this isn't a wrench or a hammer. This is an aircraft flying through the sky. And we've got to be careful of, taking down aircraft out of the sky, whether it's a Cessna 172, a 737, or a small UAS. So some things to consider. The FAA just kicked the can to the right there with regards to remote ID. But would that have solved the problem here? I would probably venture to say no, but I would like everyone else to weigh in here. It sounds like Dawn's shaking her head. No, that wouldn't have done it.
No, remote. Tim, you and I have talked about this. Remote ID is not the be-all, end-all solution. It's important to be able to identify people who voluntarily register their drone like they're supposed to, right? And then buy the right drone that actually broadcasts either, all those message elements as it's part of the remote ID rule. But I wanted to back up for a second and say 2 things about your article, Tim, which, by the way, I love. Well, actually 3 things. Number 1, it's a Drone Life article, so yay, Drone Life. They, of course, present our Dawn of Drones podcast. And so number 2, this article really focused quite a bit on Defense Solutions, who, by the way, was on our Dawn of Drones podcast last week. We had Gabriel Bendheim, their pre-sales manager, talking about their cyber takeover solution. And then number 3, I totally agree, Tim. There's a lot going on here when it comes to regulation. And when I say a lot going on, like there's talk of it, but there's no real substance yet. And I agree with you. I think that's very troubling because I think, besides Defend, who has got a great solution, there's so many other counter-UAS solutions, but zero authority. And if anybody knows about authorities, it's Pat Huston, General Huston, because he advised, Army commanders as an Army JAG for years about, the actions they maybe should or should not be taking based on the authorities they had. So, Pat, I'd love to get your thoughts on this article, too.
Yeah, well, I would say two things, Don. First of all, to all the NFL fans out there, I apologize that my drone use shut down operations for a little bit. No, what I'll say is I thought this was a fantastic article, but you came in, like, my first question as I looked at it was like, how do you distinguish between friend and foe? I know, there are other drones that are legitimately flying there, doing things for the NFL and others, and how it seems like such a difficult task to make sure you're focused on the right drones. How do you do that? What's the technology that supports that?
So absolutely. I think with regards to that technology, you said it, right? You broke down IFF, identify friend or foe, and ADSB, so automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, right? So one thing I didn't mention in my bio, I worked at FAA headquarters in flight standards and aviation safety and led the teams that wrote Part 107, the registration rule, in addition to Part 121 and 135 oversight. So if we get back to technology, let's do the analogy of ADSB. I was in the building when general aviation pilots were up in arms that we were starting to push ADSB to increase general aviation safety. Because remember, that is the FAA mission. First page of 14 CFR, aviation safety. It doesn't say security, it doesn't say operations, it says safety. And so when we first had that push, the technology wasn't there. And quite frankly, it was expensive. It was heavy, just like everything else that we look into the four edges of where we're going. But now if you look at ADSB is the size of a $50 coin within our technology, and the price of it and IFF has gotten down so low and so small that it really would not affect small UAS operations and create a huge safety and for the entire industry, versus what we talked about with Dawn as remote ID, which is Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, which is made for very near in or after the fact. So, I mean, can these aircraft come up on scopes for air traffic control? Absolutely. But do we want to litter their screens with thousands of small UAS? That's the problem we've got to work out. Working with air traffic organization and working with industry, how do we figure this out to be able to show that aircraft, because that's what it is, and be able to be proactive, saying, hey, it's heading for that NFL field, but it's not nefarious. We're in communication with the operator. And just like if I wandered off in my Cessna 172 through Pax River, restricted airspace here in Maryland, I get a call on guard that tells me you're not where you're flying or not where you're supposed to be flying. So I think that's something that we should consider.
And
so
Mike, I want to get to Mike too here in a second, but real quick, Pat, so there is technology out there, and the FAA has decided ADSB is not something they're going, in fact, they don't want it on the small drones for the reason Tim just said. But from the legal standpoint in this kind of regulatory policy arena, the challenge is that only a handful of federal agencies have the authority to even detect drones legally, let alone mitigate them and take action against them. And one of the big authorities is the Preventing of Emerging Threats Act, which was I believe it was in the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act. It is sunsetting like this month. And everybody is, we're talking DOJ, FBI, United States Coast Guard, and so I know I'm sure I missed one or two. DOD has 10 USC 130I, so they're good to go. But the authorities given to all these other federal agencies, and there's only, like I said, 4 or 5, they're expiring. And the president put out the first national counter UAS action plan. That's a first. They're lobbying hard for Congress to not only re-up those authorities, but increase them and give them, who needs them, Pat? We know this, right? Boots on the ground, right? state, local, tribal, territorial governments. It's going to be the local cops that show up to these things, not the FAA or the FBI necessarily, unless it's a giant national security event. So none of them have this authority right now, and that's a big deal. Mike, over to you.
Well, I also would question why is there not any kind of thought yet that I've seen consolidated anywhere on an eventual path to licensure for third parties to at least detect, right? So this way the investment is not entirely on the state side, especially if we're talking in terms of Disney World, theme parks, sporting events, anywhere where you're having mass kind of consolidation of humans in a single space. There are threat actors. There's a bad thing can happen, especially with a drone. And so
Mike,
yeah.
There is a draft. There is a statute that has been proposed, and it's making its way through Congress.
So this is recent?
Yeah, it is. I'm trying to find the name of it here. I apologize. By the way, everybody, I did write an article on this for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine. It's coming out in the next 30 days or so. So keep your eye peeled for that. It's all in there. But this proposed act would actually give owners of critical infrastructure. I don't recall how that's defined. I think it's defined in another statute. Honestly, they harken back to another definition. But to have some authority here, and I don't know if Disney World would be counted in there. But yeah, you're right. Absolutely. 80-90% of our critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector.
Right, and increasingly so, right? Like there's lots of moves to make roads as privatized as possible in certain states. So if you limited the authority only to the public, they wouldn't even be able to help. So until the problem has already happened.
I think a good analogy, if we were going to put a statute, one, we've got to coordinate with 14 CFR, right? Because the authority under the FAA is anything a millimeter off the ground is under their purview out to 12 nautical miles. But a good analogy would be the maritime industry. And something that my company is doing, Nordic Unmanned, with Equinor and with oil and gas in Norway and beyond, is flying past 12 nautical miles. There are still laws that are in effect. So oil platforms outside of 12 nautical miles may not fall under EASA or the FAA, but they fall under Admiralty and maritime law. And within 150 meters of that platform is a safety zone. So maybe something in that kind of analogy would be beneficial for us to work through with Congress, with the FAA, DOT, and all the other organizations and three letters that we'd have to work with.
That makes a lot of sense because I remember, I forget the name of the organization, but tower inspection was a concern with the Part 107 flight rules, and they let it be known that if you don't allow us to get close to these towers, then these inspections wouldn't be able to be conducted. So an allowance was made, right? Or at least a consideration that changed the way that the rule was drafted. So there is a path forward. I'm just kind of surprised that we haven't gotten there yet, considering a lot of the talk around drone safety, sporting events has been right there at the top of the discussion. The NFL has definitely talked about it for years now. We had speakers at my show talk about it. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't kind of bubble all the way up yet.
Absolutely. Well, you are getting it because I'm actually meeting with the Baltimore Ravens here in Baltimore this week to talk about UAS operations and solutions and services we can provide to help them both from efficiency standpoint, from everything from security and surveillance to counter UAS to helping them with being more efficient with their turf field of using a drone versus gas-powered vehicles on the field. So I think you're starting to see those, but I think, Dawn mentioned there's a lot of law that hasn't gone through the top level to the Supreme Court to be precedents of the land for us to know where we fall on peeping Tom rules, civil authority rules, and what's going to be carved out, if any, from the FAA.
absolutely
I love
important
that
stuff.
you just talked about drones, like the positive use of drones. I'm thinking of the drone lawnmowers out there. As a kid, I used to mow lawns, and when you see these robotic lawnmowers out there on the field of either an NFL or college field, and it's just taking all of the work out of it for some poor person behind that, I'm like, okay, this is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, getting rid of
I
the
didn't
dull
even
and dirty, right?
Absolutely. I did not realize the amount of resources and the cost now in the last 2 years for fertilizer, antifungals, and hydration for golf courses, for turf fields, and to be able to be more efficient with those resources and sustainability increases, but also the cost. I mean, in some instances, costs have gone up 300% for companies and organizations to keep those turf fields and whether it's NFL or golf courses to those level and standards.
All right, next up, we're going to be talking about the other side of the robot revolution, which is artificial intelligence. So, Patrick, you want to tell us a little bit about your article?
Absolutely. No, I love stuff about AI, and last month I stumbled on this article in the New York Times by Kevin Roos, and you can see it here. It's called "We Need to Talk About How Good AI is Getting." And I'd like to say that I'm a really sophisticated consumer of fine literature, and that's what caught my attention. But the truth is, it was the pictures. Okay.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, the pictures. And not just this one. There were a whole bunch of really cool pictures in this thing. And one of them was like a 1920s black and white mobster. It was kind of looked like Al Capone, I think. I don't really know my mobster history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was it. And I look at it more closely and I realized, wait a minute, this mobster's holding up an iPhone taking a selfie. What's going on here? And so I dive into this article, and it's talking about this newest capability with this software called dall-e. And it's a play off of the Wall-E and Salvador Dali, the artist. And what it is you say, or you type in some words to describe something, and it produces a handful of images that are trying to match what you do. Now the thing is, it's not going to it's not a Google search where it goes through and tries to pull images off the net that may match what you're talking about. This is creating them from scratch. And it was such an incredible concept. And so over this weekend, I was diving through into the program, typing up all sorts of stuff. In the article, they had that photograph of the mobster. They had another one, a sailboat knitted out of blue yarn, which sounds strange, but
that one looked ridiculously accurate too.
Unbelievably realistic photos, and just playing around with it, crazy stuff about Frank Sinatra and Sophia Loren playing backgammon or anything you want to throw in there. The pictures that were coming out were just astounding, and it's just an amazing concept, and it's crazy to see how far this capability is going. Now, Don, I know you've talked to folks about the art community is really up in arms about, is this really art? Is it not? And the concern about displacing artists and other workers that are out there, that's a concern we see across the tech space as this stuff is getting so good. Now, this article, I thought, I don't know, has anyone else played with this?
I have, yeah. And Dream Fusion and Stable Diffusion, and yeah, been playing around with a lot of these actually. So actually, we've done some art. Some of our thumbnails for our channel are done with Dream, which is an app you can download by Wama Dream. Yeah.
I will tell you, I had so much fun with this. There was a similar music program that someone kind of raised, and it's called MuseNet. And you just type in different artists, and it will combine music into a new type of style. A couple that we did were Adele and Mozart combined, and it produces like a new musical score for you that kind of combines those styles. We also did Billie Eilish and the Beatles. Talk about some really bizarre.
That seems like a conflict.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is amazing, and for me, that was the point of the article, where it's just, this stuff is amazing. The capabilities are getting so quickly getting beyond what we anticipated, but yet there are also some risks.
Yeah, well, I mean, I also think if we bring it back to drones, I mean, this is another path forward showing us how we can move AI more quickly for end-to-end solutions for our customers, versus the old way of having a algorithm from NVIDIA or stock Microsoft Azure or Google, and then having an expert having to basically tag and build from its infancy, from toddler to maturity. And now you have these type of programs that are basically taking multiple algorithms, multiple pieces of information, and they're creating those outcomes. So if we like looked at railroad inspection, something that we're very heavily involved with, being able to quickly learn railroad inspection standards to be able to make railroads safer, more effective, and not harm on-time performance. I mean, these things have applicability, well past just art.
Yeah, I'll say that.
What were you gonna say?
No, go ahead, Mike.
No, no, actually, you go first.
Okay, in the cybersecurity space, we're seeing this too, which is it's kind of an ironic twist because in cybersecurity you need both offense and defense, and the offense is the bad actors out there. They're the cyber threats. They're all using AI technology to help them thrust forward their nefarious capabilities. But it's the cybersecurity defense teams that really need the same AI capability to stay on par with or stay a little bit ahead of the adversaries out there. So it's just kind of ironic that this AI technology, these capabilities are being used on both sides of the aisle for folks to kind of keep things abreast of each other.
Well, actually, let me jump on that a little bit because this is one of my larger kind of concerns. If you look at the history of kind of like security vulnerabilities in computing, hacking the human is actually usually easier, and a lot of the the world's best hacks are a phone call, and then they get the information they need to get in. So, for example, I sent a laptop out to one of our other producers, and via UPS, he got a text message this morning from USP saying, your address information is incorrect. Please click on this link. So think about the orders that had to go through for that to happen. Somebody either algorithmically or maybe through basic deduction figured out the UPS tracking code system and just incrementally goes through this and then matches that data to a database. But you could easily see one of these AI voice kind of algorithms getting on the phone with him, pretending like it's a service to change the address or get critical information out of him, and now, Bob's your uncle, you're done. Basically, they've threaded a line through that vulnerability. They've hacked the human. And you think about for elderly people, they won't even see that coming,
No, my parents get these crazy phone calls all the time. I mean, they really target, right, the senior citizen population. But I want to bring this back to art for a second, because that's where we started. It looks like we're getting some comments in the chat too.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about all of these different AI capabilities, whether it's for art, like you just showed us, Pat, in this article, or the music application you just mentioned, is this idea of accessibility. It may allow people that to tap into a creative side they didn't even have, or maybe they physically are unable to do things, but with their voice now they can create things, right? By telling the computer, so I do love that about it. And we had a huge debate a couple shows ago. We talked about how AI, this gentleman in Colorado had used AI to create this really cool painting, won an art contest, and people were, it was, the category, Mike, remind me, it was like digital, it was like digital art or digital
manipulation. So my personal feelings was that he was totally within the bounds of the contest.
But some of the judges didn't appreciate that the AI completely made it, right. And then Pat, both of you, Pat and Tim, will appreciate this too. We also talked about the U.S. Patent Office had made a ruling recently that if you list AI as the sole inventor, you can't.
Yeah.
They won't recognize it. AI cannot be the sole inventor. So all of this stuff is going to come to a head at some point in the exact right case, where you're going to have a piece of art or music, or somebody's going to try to copyright something or patent something, and decisions are just going to have to be made. But I think you're right. I think we're in a really interesting inflection point here when it comes to AI.
Well, I
Now,
think
I'll
that,
take.
sorry, I think the basis there is the piece actually transformative from what the AI did? So like you might just put your signature in. Does that count as transformative or not? So what were you
So,
gonna say?
on one hand, it's such amazing capabilities, and of course, what are the risks here? The article is really trying to say, amazing capabilities, amazing potential, but also some risks. And for me, I'm concerned about the risk of these capabilities. You talk about the accessibility. You talked about deep fakes, and for me, it's the deep fakes risk here. Deep fakes of someone using deep fake voice impersonation technology, deep fake video technology to call someone with about a UPS order. For me, my prediction is we're going to see more and more deep fakes in two different contexts. One is courtrooms, and as an attorney, I'm very concerned about that. If you can create evidence, manufacture evidence, it totally discredits all the evidence out there. And you need to have some really accurate authentication procedures to ensure you know what you're looking at, what you're hearing, what you're seeing. On the other side, the other thing that concerns me is sort of the national security implications. As a retired military officer, I think of this as the risk of global instability, the propaganda, the false information that could be out there, the false narratives, and how that can just cause people to lose confidence in their governments, lose confidence in world order, and just create instability. I think those would be terrible outcomes, but they are serious risks here with this type of technology.
But we've already seen that, right, Pat? And Tim, I mean, everybody, right? We've seen this in the last several years, meddling in elections in the United States, just the things going around Facebook. And then, then you see some social media outlets like shutting people down, and so there's these First Amendment implications too. So, boy, this is, you've raised a whole bunch of issues just from some really cool AI art, to be sure.
Well, AI tends to just raise issues, right? Because it makes us think about what is actually human here, and how much do the systems that we set up for human-to-human trust actually hold up in a completely computerized environment that can literally manufacture reality.
Absolutely. I mean, and the more and more we rely upon AI for different solutions, as Patrick mentioned, there's more implications for security and risk. Let's go back to the railroad example. I'm using a drone with a LiDAR, high resolution camera, and AI algorithms to look at track safety, track inspections, and someone hacks into that and provides information that's opposite to where I find a defect in the track that could cause a derailment or fatality or crash. That could be a huge risk for the industry. So we've got to make sure that we stay ahead of that and provide those security enablers that stay ahead of the bad guys, right?
Yeah, I think people are finally thinking about privacy, security, and surveillance a lot more than they used to. Like, everybody kind of woke up post-pandemic in a world where, wait, all these things are actually at risk, and we're starting to see kind of the bad effects from previous reckless behavior, not considering security and privacy with all of this early internet stuff. So I just want to bring up some questions from the chat. I don't know who knows the answer to this, but they asked directly to Dawn. Joe Mattern says, I'm currently researching heavy lift drones. Who currently manufactures the world's largest lift drone? Is it Griff Aviation in Norway, or would it be Saberwing? Anybody? If not, we can find an answer.
Okay, so words matter, right? We're using the word drone, and when I think of that, there's a lot of electric vertical takeoff landing aircraft that are focused on cargo. I think Saberwing is obviously one of them. They're out of California. Ed DeReyes is the CEO there, great guy. By the way, retired Air Force as well. There's a whole bunch of heavy lift drones. Volatus is using that Avidrone, but I don't know how heavy lift it is.
Well, and you're right. Words matter, right? So
is a drone or
drone is an unmanned aircraft, right? So there's a company out of Poland right now that has actually got a tested, certified CH-7 helicopter, which is usually manned with two pilots, and they're flying that unmanned autonomously, and that is a huge heavy lift platform for unmanned systems.
Yeah, so, that's significant. I think there's a lot of them out there globally, and let's be frank here. I think cargo for drones or kind of these autonomous helicopters, the electric, eVTOL, aircraft. Cargo is going to be probably one of the very first use cases, right? Besides some maybe public safety or something. But even on that side, I think they're going to be using them for logistics. They're not going to have people in them. They're going to be carrying supplies. And so keep your eyes open because, by the way, check out Vertical Flight Society has a eVTOL directory. They have over 700 designs in there. 700 different eVTOL aircraft of different configurations at all levels of just pen to paper versus no kidding, like Beta Technologies just got, was it last May? Maybe it was a year ago. Certified by the Air Force, the first one. So
we got some more comments. We got Desi, yikes, love this topic, talking about AI risk. Then we got Ramon Roche. Can you copyright AI generated content? And I'll ask, when does it actually qualify that a human added enough that it's copyrightable? Anybody know?
I'm going to throw that out to Pat if he knows.
I don't know.
All right, so that's a case coming to a neighborhood near you.
I think that's going to be on the
Google that.
USPTO office and your law firm, right? Going back and forth to find out who's going to get it through and who's your portfolio manager from USPTO.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break just to talk about our wonderful sponsors. As you can see up here, we've got L-Site, who provides connectivity solutions. We've got Dragonfly, Promo Drone, and Aiken Gump. So we thank all of our sponsors for supporting this show and the Full Tilt and everything throughout the Full Crew Network. So we're actually going to stick on the topic of AI, and I'm going to take it a step further. We're going to stick on art. So Dream Fusion just released recently. So fancy way of saying we optimized Nerf from scratch. That's like saying we're building 3D models from scratch with no 3D data initially. So basically from its memory of, a library of two-dimensional photos, based on your text input, it's actually generating these 3D models. Now, are these 3D models good? They're a little bumpy. I've downloaded them. And also, it's low poly crab. It's not actually low poly, but it fakes the aesthetic of a low poly crab. So basically, the reason I think this is so important is because it's a new evolution in this AI generated art, and it's already here. So we're talking about a couple of months. We were working almost entirely within 2D images. And I think for the creative industry, especially for, let's say entertainment on the level of Disney, Marvel, Netflix, they use so much 3D CGI that there's multiple studios that are actually working with the main studio to produce all that content over the course of a film now, when it used to just be one. And the workload is such that it could actually bankrupt a company. In fact, I think it was, Life of Pi? Whatever the movie was when he was on a boat with a Bengal tiger.
Yeah, it was Life of Pi.
Yeah, they made a directorial decision at the end that caused the company who made the tiger to have to invest so many overtime hours that they went out of business because they actually had to front the bill for it. But imagine if the director comes in and just says, I think the tiger needs more stripes. And that's all he has to say, and now the tiger has more stripes. I think you're in a completely different world in terms of creativity and how we actually sculpt things for movies, rather than this multi-step, multi-layer, multi-process. Now it's just as simple as the awesome 2D art that Patrick had brought up. So, thoughts?
I'll jump in and just say I think this is really cool, and the caliber of the product, you said it could be a little bumpy, but still you can see the potential that's there. For me, it's not just the art world that's going to benefit from this. Not just the entertainment industry, but you think about transitioning to gaming and how much more realistic the gaming can be. But then other commercial industries like architects or even manufacturers of any items out there who want to get a model of what they're creating or see it in different contexts, see it work different ways. Such a better, easier, cheaper, faster, and safer way to do it than the old school method of creating this stuff from hand and testing it with physical testing.
Yeah, there was software. So do you know Maya? It's 3D kind of CADs or editing software. But basically, they put out an AI plugin years ago called Dreamweaver, and what it would do was it would find the least amount of material you would need to actually composite an object. And I believe one of the use cases was actually taking weight off of a plane. So all the parts that they could replace, and almost everything kind of looked like this, like it was like a woven thread, because it was using the smallest amount of material possible. So all those air gaps kind of gave it like an amoeba, almost fungus type look, but it was sheet metal. And what was so interesting about that is no human would make that shape. You wouldn't even think of it, right? So I definitely see what you're saying there. The possibilities for architecture are literally out of this world. You could imagine buildings that would look to the naked eye completely structurally unsound, but are actually sturdier than the ones that we could build today with nice straight lines. So
I'm just waiting for Tim to take this back to drones.
Oh, exactly. For drones. I mean, remember, simulation's important, right? So, and the industry is pretty much in its infancy of introducing simulation, something that's really helped aviation and aviation safety. I mean, Class D simulators in the FAA world are equal or better than the aircraft. And most of us in the military and even in commercial airlines, 10, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have even thought of doing 100% of our training requirements in a simulator because they just weren't there. You didn't have that immersion that you have because of the amount of time and cost for 3D modeling. Right. And now we have the ability to do that not only for commercial aviation that can pay top dollar for a 737 simulator, but for drone simulation. And then we can take it all the way back to the beginning of those drones flying into the NFL stadium, right? If we have more simulation and training for our remote pilots, Part 107 pilots, it makes them better pilots, more experienced pilots, where they can look at their flow of where they're going to fly today, and they see the stadium and go, oh, wait, I forgot, I can't fly over there, right? If they would have done the simulation first.
Wow, my brain is exploding right now. So you just said so many things that I want to comment on, Tim. Number one is, I actually know a company. I met a company when I was in DC that's doing simulation kind of in the counter drone space to do the kind of the red blue team stuff, right? So really cool for the military, for commercial applications. Also, vertical takeoff landing, the eVTOL crowd, the advanced air mobility crowd, they're going to need sims. And I think that's going to be significant to training, right? And then, of course, with the BVLOS ARC that you mentioned and the training, I think advanced training is going to be needed for beyond visual line of sight, whether drones or eVTOL. I think that's going to be key. What I was thinking about was my brain went to the dark side after Pat's earlier comments on security, because I was just thinking, so many companies not so many, there's a handful of companies doing great work in the AR, VR space and 3D modeling right after inspection. So they'll use a drone, they'll do the scan, they'll download it through the software, and then, maybe with like cUAS, cUAS.ai is an example out of Canada. It was on our show earlier, Dawn of Drones, in January this year. So that's a great application for AI, but imagine now with this 3D kind of text to 3D feature, if I'm a bad guy, like you said, Tim, let's just say I did a 3D model or something of a train track. And now let's say by texting, I can alter what that looks like, unbeknownst to anybody else. So again, I could see where there's just so many amazing uses. I could see the dark side of this technology. And then here's my last question. I guess I'll throw this out to everybody. We just had Sharon Rossmark on our Twitter Spaces for Full Crew last week. We were live from Move America, and she brought up a Mike, what's the word?
Biometric.
But thank you.
Use
brain
of
just stopped
biometrics
working. My brain is so full it stopped working. Yeah, biometric security. So how close are we to using all of this cool technology to do now a 3D model of my eyeball? So somebody can go into the airport and look like they're me, in the Clear, app or
I
something.
got an answer to this. Okay, so
Okay, go.
that's like asking a computer to write Shakespeare by accident. So without actually knowing what the model has to build towards, you couldn't backwards engineer that. It would basically be a random generator. So
But they are 3D modeling organs, my friend. And so my question is,
yeah, but they can't model
use
yours, which is what the biometric reader is picking out. It can model
Unless they're
an
accurate
organ
to
that
start with.
approximates it. So in that case, fingerprints, eyes, those are probably still safe, but voice might be bad for you because you use it so often publicly. And this was kind of the thing that I was bringing up in that conversation is, for example, there needs to literally be law around secure elements in phones or any device that scans your fingerprint. And if that's misused or that data escapes, because if that data does escape for enough people, let's say we have a massive hack where 200,000 fingerprints make it out to the wild, fingerprints are now no longer a good biometric anywhere for anybody.
So it sounds like we're back to that layered approach, just like we talked about on a different subject. So if her voice is well known and it's easily hackable, you're going to need voice, eyeball, fingerprints, and maybe another piece of physical information so that you have that redundancy and layered approach. So much harder to hack all of those at the same time.
Yeah, and then there might even just be a physical backup. I've been wondering why I don't see more of this. Like, we have authenticator apps on our phone for some critical sign-ins. There's no reason why that shouldn't be like a keychain that we all hold, and that actually is our primary password system when biometric fails. And between those two, it would be very hard. Like, you'd have to wait until the sun died to hack through both of those, to be honest. So,
has anyone heard of this company out there called Red 6 Aviation that does simulation? Okay, I'll just lay out it. It's a concept created by a former British fighter pilot who trained was the first one to fly stealth fighters with the U.S. Air Force. He started this company called Red 6, and what they do is they do augmented reality fighter pilot dogfighting training. So they have the pilot being trained flying an actual aircraft, but they're dogfighting with 3D modeled augmented reality enemy aircraft that don't really exist, but they're completely computer generated. And it is a perfect example of this 3D modeling used in a way that makes the training more effective because it's so realistic. It's also a lot safer and a lot cheaper. So unbelievable capabilities that are out there. They just partnered with Boeing, I think, for Air Force fighter pilot training.
Yeah, and I imagine the next step for that, for simulation, if we're able to do full 3D models, what would it take to actually do text to tactical maneuver, or like literally setting up the operation, right, or simulation that you're trying to account for? Like, what happens if
Now we're getting back into Clint Eastwood and Firefox days, right? And we're probably not that far off. I may have shown my age there, but the old movie where it was thought versus text, right? And being able to offer up real operation from the end of that.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't think it's that far, to be honest. If we're able to build 3D models, then what's the difference between that and placing them on a war map?
That's right.
So,
and we have some of those applications, and Patrick knows, and Dawn knows, with JHIMIC's Joint Helmet Mounted Cueing System and our fighter aircraft that do augmented reality of some of the switches and instrumentation in the aircraft.
All right, so it's time to take a break and go to outer space for our last article.
All right, very good, very good. Well, thank you for that segue. And by the way, for those that follow the show, you know that I'm not in my normal basement location. I did want to give a shout out to the University of North Dakota Center for Innovation, who graciously allowed me to use their space today. I'm here in Grand Forks, North Dakota for the UAS Summit and Expo this week. We'll be doing lots of streams. We'll talk about that at the end, but big shout out to True Weather Solutions that had the connection with UND to get me in here because the hotel Wi-Fi ain't working. So anyway, let's get back to space. Let's talk about the Space Jam, right? You guys seen the original movie, by the way, was so much better than the sequel. No contest there.
Is,
but
is
I've got
anybody
the-
fighting for the LeBron Space Jam? Anybody out
Oh,
there?
it's awful. I know, it's just like, welcome to the Space Jam. So what are we talking about here? Humankind has launched more than 13,000 satellites into Earth's orbit since 1957 at the beginning of the space age. Of those, 9,000 still remain. They collide, they break up, they create major debris. And why do you care? Because these objects often travel faster than a speeding bullet at more than 22,300 miles per hour. A little piece of space debris the size of a BB could actually pierce your position, navigation, timing satellite and knock out GPS. Okay, so very, very significant why we care about space junk. And what the last thing I saw was there's either 900,000 or 1 million pieces of space junk that are currently passing over our heads every single day. And those are including from government abandoned satellites. So this article talks about how the FCC has just created a rule that requires basically removing space junk within 5 years. Removing defunct satellites within 5 years of when they are no longer in commission. Why do you care? This is a really interesting, weird regulatory issue where you're now starting to see some almost like who's got the authority here, right? So when you think about commercial space, the FCC grants licenses, right? NASA, of course, has a huge role in space. And everybody's like, wait a minute, who's on first? Who actually should be issuing these rules? And Congress got a little, frankly, ticked off that the FCC unilaterally issued this rule. And it's not the first time. I just wrote an article about this. Google Don's Old Eye Space Jam Inside GNSS and you'll find it. But the Congress has put out this, they're calling the Orbits Act, the the Orbital Sustainability Act, the Orbits Act. And what it's doing is saying NASA, Commerce, National Space Council need to first publish a list of debris that pose the greatest risk to orbiting spacecraft. NASA needs to establish a program of debris removal because that technology, there's a whole, and by the way, you know, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's the interesting thing about space is it's governed, space law is governed primarily by treaty. And under the treaty, you know, the question is even who, you know, it's really the nation state that put that satellite up there that has the responsibility to remove it. So, you know, in our own country, you see this infighting between the FCC, Congress, NASA, you know, lots of issues, but it's such a critical issue. And
and the implications are heavy, right? So now your cost of your satellite has to take into account that it needs to be removed if that becomes law. So how much does that cost in the actual launch and recovery of that satellite? Probably a lot. And then, you know, who are the players that can do that? I mean, is the two major trash companies on the planet, Waste Management and a couple of those, going to start getting to the space trash business with aligning with companies that understand the market value that's in there? So I think a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, so I'll admit that I have no background in space junk. Okay, so but I read this as a total layperson. I was going through and I was surprised by two things. The first, Dawn, is the one that you've already alluded to, is the fact that there's this jurisdictional battle. Because I was quite surprised to see the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, weighing in on, you know, the physical results of space debris out there. It just seemed kind of odd to me. And then, of course, NASA coming back saying, we think we might be a better entity to address this, or at least members of Congress saying that we think NASA might be better to address that. That would certainly be my instinct as an outsider here. But the second piece was more interesting to me. It was the substance, the actual, like, what is this 5-year rule really necessary or right? And NASA's position, what I saw, said, we don't think you need to have a 5-year rule. We think under most circumstances, the traditional 25-year rule is totally sufficient to provide the safety and security that we need. And so it seems to me like there needs to be some more research into this to figure out before you spend a lot of extra money in increasing the requirements on companies, as Tim said, that it's going to make it a lot more expensive to do these things that are essential to what we do as a society. You need to take a look at this.
Yeah, I think SpaceX takes theirs down within 3 months. So, again, from the technology standpoint, to Tim's point, to the cost standpoint, 5 years, 25 years, 3 months, what's that sweet spot? I don't know, but obviously someone needs to figure it out. Mike, what are you thinking?
I don't know.
Well, at least you've got we know that NASA can hit the target on a meteor when they need to. So from their testing there in the last couple of weeks. So that's a good backup plan, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure that created a bit of space junk when you exploded. I'm just throwing that out there.
They got that way far away from the Earth, thankfully. But no, I almost wonder if this was like a purposeful move. A little bit conspiracy here to move the ladder up by making the requirement. So sometimes that's kind of backdoor dealing stuff you could see here. Because what jurisdiction did the FCC like? Imagine that they're the person or they're the entity that actually should be handling this. Is it interfering with anything within the communications?
It could. That's the article I wrote.
What's that scenario though?
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If it hits a couple GPS satellites out, we're going to have impact for aviation operations around the world, right? And military and commercial and all kinds of
everything.
Stuff.
Tim, we don't go anywhere without firing up our Waze app or Google Maps or whatever. And just imagine a life without GPS. Like we would just implode. Honestly, we'd be sent back to the dark ages.
A life without this show, we'd be off the air.
Yeah, I know. Heck, I couldn't even get Wi-Fi over there at the hotel.
I often say that to people when they're impatient with the internet. I'm like, let it go to space and come back. Give it a second.
It's traveling the speed of light, so come on. That stuff's fast.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
No, but just to take it even a little bit further, so what you're telling me is that the FCC is concerned that this is a huge threat, but NASA wasn't. What would be a normal way for them to go about expressing that concern rather than just, putting it on the books? Is there any other interagency communication on issues like this?
Yeah, there's a whole space council. there's a whole apparatus set up in the government. Well, yeah.
Space council.
Yeah, and of course, now we were just joking about it beforehand, but it's a real thing. We really have a United States Space Force. They're called Guardians. So there's so many different stakeholders at this point. It's one of those things that like Patrick just said. All of us having been in the military, me, Pat, Tim, and having been JAGs, space law, it was very niche. It was only a very few handful until recently of people, at least in the Air Force, were getting Master of the Laws degrees in space law, maybe 2 a year. It's one of those things that not a lot of people know about, but it's one of those things that I think is so critical to all life and modern life. And also, when you think about the drone industry in particular and satellite communications, position, navigation, timing, everything we do depends on space, and it's something that most people are pretty ignorant about, even lawyers. So I feel like this is just an interesting area to keep an eye on and keep watching. I know I get a newsletter in my inbox every day called Breaking Defense, and I scanned through it this morning. I'll tell you, let's just say hypothetically 10 articles, 8 of them were about space.
I think and one thing that comes to mind of talking about the different interagencies and stakeholders that play in this realm kind of beckons back to intelligence, right? And let's look back to September 11th, and then we created this position stakeholder that supposedly is the maestro of intelligence called Director of National Intelligence.
Right.
I don't think we have that yet in space, right? So we still have a rivalry going on of who's in charge.
Interesting. The Office of the Director of National Space, ODNS. I like it.
You heard it here first.
It's
I don't think it's
breaking.
going to decrease in importance, right?
No,
You
heck
know,
no.
look, there's not only SpaceX, there's Blue Origin, there's, I think Northrop Grumman is involved in satellites of this nature. So, um, you know, and so many critical functions like GPS already rely on it. But the future of the internet is probably very satellite based too, at least as a minimum in a redundancy sense. Uh, and you know, given how many natural disasters are having on the ground now, where it's even hard to get insurance, you kind of want to have the satellite backup. That's for sure. Sure.
That's right. Did
So,
you just see the article this morning? What was it? SpaceX just sent Starlinks, Elon Musk down to Florida, right, to help with internet connectivity.
yeah,
Yep.
and that's not going to decrease. So, SpaceX and Starlink is going to be sending Starlinks to a lot of people. I mean, one, it's good advertising, and two, it proves the product's worth, right? I'm actually curious. We'll put this up in the air. What happens when
No
we
pun
have
intended.
yeah, when when we have enough kind of, because a lot of the rules of the road are based on terrestrial wire, right? Who owns what, where, and spectrum on the ground. But if it can be covered by a global satellite system, then who's making the money off of that, and why do we have to kind of have kind of the cost structures that we currently have? I think that'll get blown apart as this technology increases. So definitely not going to be less important. We're
The
coming.
bottom line is we don't want things blowing apart in space. Like that is
No.
bad. And we need to figure out like who is actually supposed to be governing the removal of that space junk. So, yeah.
All right, we're coming up on time. So, Dawn, what's coming up this week? We got a lot of cool stuff.
Oh my gosh, we got so much going on. And what you all don't know, because I didn't push it out on my social yet, is tune into my LinkedIn tonight, 4 p.m. Central, which is 5 p.m. Eastern. I should be doing, fingers crossed, internet connectivity live stream from Grand Sky in North Dakota. So lots of luminaries there tonight. So that should be a really great random live stream tonight. But tomorrow we're doing a special crew live from the UAS Summit and Expo with 3 special guests: Ned Talbot from Semaphore Scientific, Joey Schmidt from Eyesight RPV, and Joey Reedy from Thread, which was formerly Airtonomy. So check that out tomorrow at our normal time. We're going to be doing that live stream at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 Eastern. And then Wednesday, continuing with the North Dakota theme, we've got On the Dawn of Drones, Tom Sawyer of Grand Sky and Don Bershoff from True Weather, talking about the statewide low altitude weather service, the first in the nation that they're launching here this very week. So really excited about that, to be talking with those two. And then as I drive back from the airport, literally on Thursday, I'll be on Clubhouse, dropping audio chat with Troy Hiddle from Ellistair, talking about the benefits of tethered drones as we continue this month on the Dawn of Drones, dedicated to industry enablers. So should be a great week.
Yeah, as always, Dawn is making it seem like her week isn't always this hectic. It literally is this crazy every week. I know I produce most of her shows. I want to thank our guests for showing up and with some great articles to discuss today, and also like really diving deep and taking some unexpected turns there to really talk about these topics in depth. And also thank the audience as always. Thank you for supplying some cool questions and comments today. And again, thank you to our sponsors for supporting everything we do on the crew. Just one last reminder, subscribe, hit the like button and notification bell. You've helped this channel grow over 153% over the last 28 days. That wouldn't be possible without you, so thank you again. And that's it for this week. We are out here.